Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Monday afternoon, May 2nd, 2022. And if you'd like additional weather information, you can always go online to weather.gov. It's a point-and-click map that comes up with the continental U.S. and Alaska and Hawaii there in the lower left. You can get the most current forecast, watches, warnings, and advisories for anywhere in the country. You can check up on what the weather is doing at family or friends location. And as of this Monday afternoon, we have tornado watch in effect, southern Kansas into Oklahoma. There is a regional outbreak of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes expected in that area as we go through the afternoon and evening hours. A little further west, red flag warnings continue over northeast Arizona, all in New Mexico into West Texas, where very dry conditions combined with warm temperatures and gusty winds are creating very dangerous fire conditions. And then also in the wake of all of this, colder air, drier conditions will lead way to freeze warning for areas of southeast Colorado into western Kansas. So a lot going on once again in the lower portion of the nation's midsection. Here in Alaska, the snowmelt continues across the interior. We've seen some warm temperatures since mid-late last week through the weekend, especially middle upper Yukon Valley, and this is causing the rivers to rise as breakup approaches, so the potential for ice jams and ice jam flooding will be increasing as we go through the coming days, so be safe and be proactive. Also, windy weather, wet weather continuing along the northern Gulf Coast. We have another area of low pressure riding up on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula that's going to kind of occupy a similar position that low pressure did over the weekend. They are just to the south and east of Kodiak Island. And then just another reminder too, Chugach avalanche danger remains high there through the Chugach Mountains, Kenai Peninsula, so be careful if you are heading out in any of the backcountry, as still avalanches are possible well into the spring. So coming back to river breakup preparedness, I want you to stay safe and be proactive. Now is the time to move and safeguard property that could be impacted by floodwaters and ice. Do it now before the rivers come up and before any flow ice becomes an issue. It's a good time to move vehicles or secure anything that could be damaged by the ice and high water. Also have extra food on hand, batteries, as well as medical supplies. If you need certain heart medication, diabetes medication, make sure you have enough of that to get you through a period in case the flooding is bad enough it cuts your community off from the rest of the world for a while. And know your community safety plan and emergency shelter location so that if you should be displaced by floodwaters, you know where you can go. And then certainly stay out of the floodwaters and ice flows when they arrive, because that is very dangerous. I know a lot of people like to collect firewood then, but that is a very dangerous activity. Please be safe. And also we need your help. What we need are spotter reports, pictures, videos. If you observe some interesting, more significant developments along the river in your community, pass those images along and reports to nws.ar.aprfc@noaa.gov. That's an email that'll allow you to reach the River Forecast Center, or if it's more urgent, if something more significant has developed in the way of flooding, ice jamming, things like that, 1-800-847-1739. And a quick look at what we have going on across the state today. Fort Yukon, partly sunny skies. Temperatures will peak out in the upper 50s to near 60 degrees in that area of the Yukon Valley. And certainly that's been the case since late last week, been a very mild stretch. Further to the west, though, St. Lawrence Island, Gamble there, it's going to be a bit breezy and colder coming up tomorrow. Upper level low pressure, a colder pool of air aloft and some stronger winds aloft are going to be passing through the island tomorrow and early Wednesday. So notice temperatures could even be a bit colder than the 23 you're seeing this afternoon. And then Portage Glacier, I pointed that out yesterday. You can hardly see anything. Wind-driven rain. Winds are gusting up to 50 miles an hour out of the east-southeast with a temperature of only 36 degrees, a very raw early May day there. And then cake down in through the central panhandle, mostly cloudy, 48 degrees, some intermittent sprinkles. Another round of rain, though, is coming your way for tonight and through the day on Tuesday. Again, some areas of the panhandle could pick up another 1 to 3 inches of rainfall tonight and through the day Tuesday. Satellite imagery reveals one frontal band and area moisture pushing up toward the panhandle and west there of Haida Gwaii. We have another low that's southeast of Sand Point, and that low will become the dominant low as it works its way just southeast and east of Kodiak Island. Otherwise, there is a pocket of colder air aloft. You can kind of see a hint of that. See that little west of Utqiagvik there, entering the lower Chukchi Sea. That little curl in the clouds is an upper level low that's going to be dropping south through the Bering Strait tomorrow and over St. Lawrence Island. There'll be a pool of colder air aloft. But this afternoon we have low pressure there on the south side, on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, down around 980 millibars with an occluded front extending, arcing out ahead of it. Remnant kind of a trough up along and just north of the Alaska range. Some moisture has been able to get into especially the southern interior with a few lighter rain and snow showers, of course in the higher elevations. But as we go through late tonight, early on Tuesday, that low pressure will be situated just southeast of Kodiak Island, with the occluded front working its way further eastward up to along the northern Gulf Coast and the coastal areas of the Panhandle, with rain overspreading those areas again. More showery weather as you extend back out from the lower Gulf and into the North Pacific. On Tuesday, the low will be not moving much, just southeast there of Kodiak Island, kind of up in through the southwestern portion of the Gulf, with the occluded front weakening but kind of stuck there along the northern Gulf Coast and coastal areas of the Panhandle, with another trough lagging there, just kind of lingering up along and just north of the Alaska Range into northwest Canada. Further north and west, we'll see the coldest temperatures there along the northwest coast, western Seward Peninsula down towards St. Lawrence. And that energy aloft is going to be dropping southward across the Bering Sea and help spin up a new area of low pressure later Wednesday into Thursday, just north of the central and eastern Aleutians there across the lower Bering. And by Wednesday, you can see that low weakening there in the southwestern Gulf, trough lingering back up along the Alaska Range, and then that new area of low pressure developing just north of the eastern Aleutians in the lower Bering. So temperatures tonight with the cloud cover, rain pushing in generally above 40 in the Panhandle, 30s above freezing most areas with maybe the exception of McGrath and Glen Allen a little further there and toward the Copper River Basin. High temperatures Tuesday afternoon depending on the amount of cloud cover. Where it's cloudier, tend to stay in the 40s. If you get a smidgen of sun or some drier air, temperatures should be able to get up to or just break 50 degrees. And then Wednesday morning, lows generally above freezing across much of the region, with the exception of, say, up Copper River Basin. Otherwise, upper 30s, near 40 there along the Gulf Coast. And temperatures Wednesday afternoon should generally be back up a bit above 50 as you get a little further inland there through the south central interior. Otherwise, 40s coastal areas in through the Panhandle. Across the northwest, they'll be chilly. Some areas getting down single digits to around 10 above their northwest coast, western Seward Peninsula, a little below freezing in through the Yukon Valley. And then Tuesday afternoon, still see some temperatures in the 50s. Fairbanks still coming close to 60 degrees, mid-upper 50s there through the middle upper Yukon Valley, but cooler along, again, the northwest coast and the Seward west coast there near the Bering Strait, only near 20 degrees or so. Low temperatures Wednesday morning will be in the teens along the north slope, Arctic coast down into the far western Seward Peninsula, generally around or a tad below freezing there through the Yukon Valley. But temperatures Wednesday afternoon should once again in the Yukon Valley on the north side of the Alaska Range manage to get back up into the 50s. Across the southwest Tuesday morning, we're going to see temperatures coolest there, Eamonnok there on the south side of Norton Sound, far southwest, lower Yukon Delta in the 20s, but otherwise near or above freezing where it's cloudier and extending out the length of the Aleutian chain. Tuesday afternoon, cooler temperatures there along the southwest coast, lower Yukon Delta, but still 40s to a few 50s there on the west side of the Alaska Range. And then Wednesday morning lows, again, coolest there surrounding Norton Sound, getting down into the 20s, bit above freezing along the Alaska Range and extending out again through the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. Highs will be a bit cooler Wednesday, especially through the west, mainly only getting up into the 30s there in the southwest, lower areas of the Yukon Valley. Temperature 6 to 10 day outlook below normal May 8th through the 12th, centered on the Panhandle, and then not much change going toward mid-month May 10th through the 16th, especially southern and southeastern parts of the state. Precipitation should average near and especially a bit above normal across the eastern half of the mainland and through the southeast, with not much change as we go through May 10th through the 16th.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, here's your flying weather. If you have a flight planned Tuesday or on Wednesday, widespread IFR conditions will exist across the Gulf and Gulf Coast as a result of low pressure that will be situated south and just east of Kodiak Island during the day. Meanwhile, further north, IFR along the Arctic coast, as well as an area there south side of the Brooks Range to just north of the Yukon River. For Tuesday afternoon, IFR conditions will remain widespread across the North Slope and the Arctic coast along the Beaufort Sea, and then we'll continue to have IFR conditions there across much of the Gulf, especially the north central Gulf, east side of the Kenai, Prince William Sound, eastward through Yakutat into the northern Panhandle. And by Wednesday morning, we expect widespread IFR there in the north along the spine of the Brooks Range, North Slope, and Arctic coast, coming on down through the Bering Strait. Also, an extension up along the west side of the Alaska Range into the Yukon Valley and covering much of the Gulf Coast. We anticipate more IFR conditions. Wednesday afternoon, there will be IFR conditions continuing along the Arctic coast and then extending down through the Bering Strait and into the vicinity of St. Lawrence. Otherwise, we expect more IFR conditions centered there over the Gulf, with low pressure there toward the central portion of the Gulf. Anaktuvuk Pass on Tuesday will start out IFR, giving way to VFR conditions, as will Adigan Pass. Further south and west, along the west side of the Alaska Range, MVFR conditions anticipated at Lake Clark and Merrill, as well as at Rainy Pass. And then going up through the central Alaska Range, working eastward, Windy Pass, MVFR becoming VFR. That'll also be the case for Isabel. And then further east, Mentasta Pass should generally have VFR conditions throughout the day on Tuesday. As we head southwestward, Tanita Pass should generally be in and surrounded by MVFR conditions. Further south, though, with a frontal band that's come up in along the northern Gulf Coast, we expect moisture precipitation IFR conditions there, especially Prince William Sound. The eastern half of Portage Pass will be IFR, though some VFR conditions are possible as you fly around and west of the west entrance. And finally, in the northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see MVFR conditions become IFR as that frontal boundary pushes up into them, bringing lower clouds and more precipitation. Freezing levels are generally around, or give or take, a bit above or below 2,000 feet across the mainland. We have a bump up in these freezing levels of aloft of 4,000 and 6,000 feet down there toward the south end of the Panhandle into Haida Gwaii. And the surface freezing line Tuesday morning will generally run along the Gulf Coast and then upward into the Yukon Valley and then back out into the central Bering. The greatest threat for icing on Tuesday will exist with the frontal system that's kind of run up against the Gulf Coast from the east side of the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound all the way through the Panhandle down into British Columbia, Haida Gwaii. We'll see freezing and icing between 5,000 and 12,000 feet. A little higher up, icing levels between 9,000 and 16,000 feet, the south end of the Panhandle into British Columbia. Upper level winds at 30,000 feet. We have a low pressure circulation there between Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula with a southwesterly 120 knot wind max cutting across Haida Gwaii, and then a jet core of 165 knots south and southwest of the Aleutians. Coming down to 9,000 feet, there's a potent mid and upper level low that'll be crossing and moving into the vicinity of St. Lawrence Island, with stronger mid-level winds wrapping around that to 50 knots over eastern Russia. Low pressure continuing to sit just east-southeast of Kodiak Island with a broad area of 40 to 50 knots southwesterly winds pulling up into the Panhandle and along the British Columbia coast. And as we bring it down to 3,000 feet, we see that low pressure circulation continuing there over the western Gulf east of Kodiak, with generally 35 knot winds southwesterly there pushing onshore in through the Panhandle. Backside of the low winds are out of the northwest, 35 to 40 knots across the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, and some stronger winds over eastern Russia, 30-40 knots with that mid-level low that's going to be situated over St. Lawrence. That's going to bring some colder air at the surface, and as you get up, it'll be a little bumpier because of the stronger winds aloft. Otherwise, widespread moderate turbulence possible along the northern Gulf Coast in through the Panhandle, Haida Gwaii, surface to 4,000 feet. Backside of the low circulation, northwesterly winds creating turbulence, moderate turbulence there from the central Aleutians on up into the Alaska Peninsula.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
Averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there, or we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of the passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so that'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and looking at the sea ice edge on this Monday, May 2nd. The ice continues to melt, but it is trying to push back toward the south as we're going to have more of a northerly wind flow, especially through the eastern and northern Bering as we go through the next day or two. It'll be strongest coming up here for the day tomorrow. And we do still see some shore-fast ice there along the southwest coast and in and around Norton Sound as well as St. Lawrence. Further north, the ice is largely holding in place along the Arctic coast, but movement is anticipated lower Chukchi Sea and also through the Bering Strait. With those stronger north winds, there's a pocket of colder air aloft with an upper level low that's going to ride south through the Bering Strait on Tuesday and be located over St. Lawrence Island by Tuesday afternoon. For the southeast panhandle, winds will be southeasterly. We're going to see 25 to 35 knot winds with gusts up to 40 knots up through the length of Lynn Canal. And further south at Dixon Entrance, waves could be as high as 8 feet, 5-6 feet elsewhere. Outer Gulf Coast, 25 to 30 knots from the south and southeast. Waves running anywhere from 15 to 18 feet. Wednesday, winds will come down. The inner channels, winds will be out of the southeast at 10 to 20 knots. Strongest down there toward Metlakatla, where waves could run 4 feet. The outer coastal areas of the Gulf, 20 to 25 knot south to southeast winds, and waves coming down to around 12 to 15 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, winds will also be coming down from what they've been the past couple of days. We expect northeasterly winds, Prince William Sound, 25 knots, 4-foot waves. Also northeasterly winds, 20 to 25 knots down the length of Cook Inlet, with waves as high as 6 to 8 feet through the lower Cook Inlet and entrance there. Off the Kenai, easterly winds to 20 knots, waves around 10 feet. Wednesday, winds will further come down. Prince William Sound northeasterly at 15 knots, waves 3 feet. Northeast winds off the Kenai at 20 knots with waves around 8 feet. And then winds generally 10 to as high as 20 knots at the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves running a few feet there. Across Kodiak Island on Tuesday, winds will be northeasterly through Shelikof Strait, but light and variable on the east side. As low pressure will be sitting just to the southeast of Kodiak Island, wrapping around the northwesterly winds will be 25 to 30 knots across the Alaska Peninsula. Waves running about 12 to 14 feet well offshore in the open waters there on the North Pacific side, 5 to maybe as high as 9-10 feet there north of Cold Bay on the Bering side. For the Alaska Peninsula on Wednesday, winds will be generally out of the west at 15 to 20 knots. Waves 5 to 6 feet on the Bering side, 8 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side. And looking at the Aleutian chain, across the length of the Aleutian, winds will generally be northwesterly, around 20 to 25 knots, eastern half of the Aleutians, falling off to around 15 knots as you get around and west of Adak. Waves 9 to 13 feet on the North Pacific side and say 7 to 10 feet on the Bering side. And then during the day, Wednesday, winds will generally be out of the west-northwest, 20 knots across the length of the Aleutians. Waves 6 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side and 6 or 7 feet on the Bering side. And for Tuesday, we have a northerly, north to northwesterly component to the wind, 25 to 30 knots, ice-free area, so the ice is going to try to drift south, but as it does so, it will also have a tendency to melt. North winds 20 knots, 4-foot waves there within Norton Sound. And then winds will come down further on Wednesday, generally 10 to 20 knots out of the north, but variable at 10 knots in the vicinity of St. Paul and St. George, with waves there only running 3-4 feet. Across the Arctic coast, generally north winds will prevail. They'll be lightest along the Arctic coast, Gavik through Kaktovik, but down through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait, northerly winds will accelerate to 25 knots, again causing some ice movement there. And on Wednesday, we expect winds to be across much of the region out of the north, northeast, 20 to as high as 25 knots there in the lower Chukchi Sea, with some further ice movement there near the Bering Strait. Otherwise, low pressure overnight early on Tuesday morning just southeast of Kodiak Island, then east-southeast of Kodiak Island in the western Gulf by Tuesday afternoon, and the low will weaken and move a little further out toward the central Gulf by Wednesday as a pocket of colder air helps spin up a new low just north of the eastern Aleutians by Wednesday afternoon.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.